Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome to the next outing or the next episode, call it what you may, for New Reality, where this is PhocusWire and Phocuswright's regular kind of a Zoom side chat, if we can call it that, with industry thinkers, industry leaders about the, I guess, the new reality and also their take on how things have been going over the last couple of months, and really just kind of get a sense of and their perspective on the way things are going to go forward. So the last episode of this was with Clayton Reid of MMGY Global, and we're delighted this week that we're joined by Amir Amidi and Lio Chen. Amir is the managing director for the travel and hospitality practice at Plug and Play, and Lio Chen is the SVP, the senior vice president in the same practice. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. It's very early in your day there on the West Coast. It's very late in my day here. But thanks very much for joining us, first of all.
Pleasure to be with you.
Okay, so first of all, really, before we dive in, I mean, I hope many people do, but maybe one of you, maybe Amir, if you could just give us the very brief rundown on what Plug and Play is and what it does for the uninitiated that are watching today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So Plug and Play, our number one mission since we started the company in Silicon Valley in 2006 is to invest in startups. And initially we were focused in the startup community in Silicon Valley. Over the past decade or so, we've expanded across 30 plus offices. So now we have representation in Asia, Europe, and Latin America as well. Last year, we invested in roughly 200 startups across 17 different industries. 120 were based in North America, and the remainder were scattered between our Asian, European, and LATAM offices. So that's our number one mission, is to invest in startups, and we do it across 17 different industries. And we're primarily focused on business-to-business software. That's not saying that we're never take a look at B2C opportunities. For example, a company we invested in a few years ago called Honey under our brand and retail practice. They just got bought out by PayPal for about $4 billion. That was a B2C offering. But I would say 90% of our investments are on the B2B side. So that is our number one mission. And then about 7-8 years ago, we started getting approached by Fortune 500 companies as they wanted to get access to our portfolio companies. And they wanted to basically get the help of startups to go through their digital transformations, if you will. So they started understanding that startups may be able to do things cheaper, faster, and better than they could do on their own. So we started out in brand and retail, helping out folks like Procter & Gamble, Target, Tesco, Kohl's. And it proved to be a very powerful model, not just for the Fortune 500 companies, as well as the startups, but for Plug and Play itself. So if we introduce a startup to P&G, Procter & Gamble, and that startup ends up winning the business of P&G, that's the great market signal for our venture arm to know that the technology has a market fit and perhaps we should be investing in it. And hopefully the startup could get additional customers on top of P&G. So fast forward to today, we run roughly 50 accelerators that kind of combines Fortune 500 companies and the startup community. And through the interactions we see through these accelerators between Fortune 500 companies and the startup community, we decide which startups we want to invest money into. It kind of helps us sleep better at night that a startup was able to gain the business of a Fortune 500 company in a 90-day period. So that's essentially what Plug and Play is all about. Our mission has not changed since 2006. Essentially, we make investments in startups. That's how we see ROI on our time and capital in the long term. In the short term, the 400 or so corporations that we work with across 17 different industries pay us an annual membership fee, if you will. So that's how we keep the lights on in the short term. And then on the venture side, coming back full circle, we have invested since 2006 in over 1,000 startups.
Okay. So there's a couple of things that you raised there. One was to stop you, to help you stay awake to help you sleep at night. presumably the last couple of months have not helped with that. I mean, just maybe we'll go to yourself, Lio, first. I mean, what has been the immediate impact, if there is something that you can analyze already, the immediate impact on the kind of the travel startup community as a whole as a result of this outbreak of coronavirus COVID-19?
So Kevin, last week we actually had our spring summit, which is a series of expos done by these industry themed verticals. And during the spring summit, travel was one of the tracks. And for our summit, it was interesting for me personally to notice that we had more startups participating as part of the audience than any of the other verticals that we support here at Plug and Play. So just to give you some perspective, typically when it comes to a summit, which is the culmination of our accelerator program, in general, we attract somewhere between I want to say 300 to 500 attendees. And for our travel expo last week, out of the 600 plus attendees we had, over 150-ish are startups. And while it is not unusual for us to get startups attending our summit just to see what the other startups in the cohort are working on, I think compared to other industries and verticals, I personally feel startups within travel tech are more united than ever. I think more and more startups realize that we have to work with each other a lot more closely to go through the storm together. And we're seeing more and more startup pivoting for a good cause in the wake of the pandemic, trying to do something a little different, not necessarily just to weather the storm, but also to kind of place the right bets per se in anticipation of some sort of recovery in the aftermath of COVID-19.
There's a couple of things that you mentioned there, Lio, which were quite interesting. You said everyone's kind of come together. There's almost like this kind of community spirit. Everyone's going to work together. Do you sense that that's happened perhaps quicker than you would have ordinarily expected? Because some might argue that whether you're an established travel brand and you have dozens of partners here, I'm looking on the screen here, and all the startups that you work with, they've had a lot of operational issues to deal with as everything started essentially falling apart. So it's quite interesting that, as you say, this kind of all in it together has happened so quickly, or does that not surprise you?
I think overall, as far as open innovation is concerned, right? Because Plug and Play is all about open innovation. We endorse and admire companies that support open innovation in general. Over the past few years, when we say open innovation, we see more collaboration as far as one startup with one organization, one large corporation, or many corporations working with a given startup, and once in a while, corporation to corporation. But very rarely we see multiple startups working on a project to support a given organization. And so I think it's interesting to see that because of the pandemic, there are more and more travel startups teaming up with each other. We actually just had a call this morning with one of our longstanding corporate partners called CWT. And as many of your audience will know, CWT is one of the top 2 travel management companies worldwide. And what they were sharing with us is that the problem statements they're trying to solve, they realize that the startups in our ecosystem are actually referring them to each other, saying, hey, have you thought about working with this particular startup? Or, you know what, we're actually co-developing something with that particular startup. So I think this is a long way of answering your question, but a short answer would be yes.
Okay. And any perspective from you then, Amir, on just that immediate impact, as we say, from let's look at it from, you talked about the community side of what Plug and Play does and connecting organizations. What about on the investment side? I mean, is there been any immediate impact on that? Are deals still in the works, or does everything kind of go on hold at the kind of financial level when there's something like this is happening and taking place?
No, we're definitely on the investment side, we're open for business. We're looking at deals. In fact, today we had a call with our ventures team looking at a deal that we've been excited about. I would say a startup that was part of our previous accelerator program. And we were discussing whether we want to invest or not. And if we do, how much are we going to put in? We committed to an investment last week. So I would say we're definitely open up for business. I would say in terms of the capital we used to deploy, the check sizes have reduced. We've reduced those check sizes by somewhere to 20 to 30%, I would say on average. But if we see a great opportunity that we believe in, we're going to write the same checks that we were writing in 2019. But in general, if I had to, ballpark it, I would say on average, our check sizes have been reduced by 20 to 30%. The quantity of investments, if I compare 2019 to 2020, that has also declined. And I think we're going to pick up those investments during the second half of the year. But with the pace we're at right now, I think we're close to about 60% of the investments we made in 2019. During Q1 and part of Q2, we've made about 60% number of investments in 2020. So right. Things have definitely been impacted. I would say Plug and Play is unique because, as mentioned earlier, we're active across 17 different industries. Travel is not the only industry that we're active in. So we're insulated in that regard, meaning our health practice, for example, is doing very, very good. Our supply chain and logistics practice is doing really well. We work closely with Walmart out of Northwest Arkansas and Tyson and JB Hunt. That program is doing super well. We have a big footprint in Asia, and obviously Asian economies are coming out of this faster than North American and European economies. So our office in Shanghai and Beijing, they're buzzing right now. So I would say we're a little bit unique in the sense that we're not exclusively in travel, and we're kind of insulated by other industries. But as far as investments in travel go, we're definitely open for business. Although we've become a little bit more critical on the type of startups we're investing in, and the check sizes have been reduced. And I would say, it's not unique to Plug and Play. But the valuations for the startups, I would say the upper hand is in the hand of investors right now when it comes to setting the valuations. Right. So even though our check sizes have been reduced, I think we're still able to get the amount of equity that we used to get in the startups pre-COVID.
Now, interestingly, we'll stick with you if we can for a moment, Amir. What is interesting is, the industry and brands in every type of sector, of every type of color, and every type of function have been affected in multiple ways. And even when there's problems with an economy, you're able to kind of foresee and adjust and things like that. In this sense, everything has gone from so many brands down to zero. So their cash flow has gone, and they're having to do all these kind of recovery efforts, or holding on to lifeboats, as the saying goes, and things like that. As investors in some of these, you must be presumably looking at some of these and thinking, we might have to let some brands go, or we might need to just scale back our investment because we've now seen a fundamental weakness in their business model, because something like this might come back again, as health experts are warning that it might. I mean, does something like this evaluate how you evaluate startups that are potentially going to catch your eye from a money perspective?
So I think that question begs another question is, do we think travel is going to come back? And that's a very simple answer, is absolutely. And then the second question would be, when are things going to go back to semi-normal? in terms of people getting on the planes and going on vacation or taking business trips. And the answer to the second question is nobody knows. The timeline for people to start traveling again domestically or internationally is a big question mark in everybody's head. But we do know it's going to happen again. I'm not a big believer that these Zoom calls are going to basically take the place of traveling in the long term. I think once there's a solution to this crisis and there's a vaccine and that vaccine gets distributed globally and people's minds are at ease, everybody will get back on planes and it will be business as usual. I don't think, doing these telecommuting or teleconferencing is something that's going to stick around much past post-COVID-19. So if you're a big believer that travel will come back, and it will come back. We've seen many, many different crises impact the travel industry, and travel has always come back stronger, leaner, and I would say better. Then we should be placing our bets in travel startups. I would also add that working with our existing portfolio companies is critical right now. They need the help of their investors and advisors, board members more than ever. So our ventures team is reaching out to all of our portfolio companies and trying to be there for them. So I would say that's priority number one. And then priority number two is investing in startups that are both serving an immediate need in the travel industry, but even more importantly, are building solutions that will stick around and be relevant post-COVID-19. So yes, absolutely. I think we should be investing. We are investing. As mentioned earlier, we are a little bit more critical in the type of startups we invest in to hedge our risk, but we don't have a choice but to stay active because we do believe travel is never going away and it will come back stronger and better.
And Kevin,
yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, perhaps allow me to quote some stats for you and your audience. Half of those are proprietary to the plug-and-play ecosystem. The other, I'm sure, are publicly available. Within the plug-and-play ecosystem, our ventures team actually did a survey reaching out to quite a decent amount of startups, early stage, obviously, just to get a sense of the impact from the pandemic. And when they were surveyed by us in terms of how the pandemic is slowing their process as far as raising capitals are concerned, and bearing in mind this includes not just travel startups, but a lot more startups all in early stage within the plug-and-play ecosystem. Over 75% said yes, the pandemic definitely slowed down our fundraising timeline. However, the silver lining here is over 77% of the investors that gave those startups a soft commitment as far as investing is concerned prior to the pandemic did not pull back. They did not pull their soft commitment. Only about 22% or 23% ended up pulling their soft commitment. And so in response to that, most of the startups that we surveyed are saying they are going to postpone their fundraising, given the circumstances. So to be precise, 53%, so more than half of the people that we reached out to said they're going to slow down. Even if our existing investors or our investors that have more or less finished the due diligence process said they're interested in moving forward, you know what, we're going to slow down. So I think these are some of the interesting numbers that you can share with your audience that are from the plug and play ecosystem. Then allow me to switch the gear kind of over to the public side of the numbers. I think as far as VC activities are concerned, I think PhocusWire might be one of the leading publication that kind of quoted numbers, since 2008, saying, overall, this amount of money had been invested into travel tech. And last time I checked, I think the number was getting pretty close to $20 billion.
Correct.
And so from Crunchbase and everything that we have access to, at least according to my ventures team, they were telling us that in 2019, travel tech altogether raised about $7.9 billion, which is up compared to the 7.1 from 2018. And then, if you just look at travel alone, that basically means there's a year-over-year increase of 3.5% in terms of ability for them to raise institutional money. But then overall, as far as global VC is concerned, regardless of the industry, the year-over-year increase was only 2.3% between 2019 and 2018. So travel was ahead of the game as far as growth is concerned, or attractiveness is concerned in the eyes of the investors. But then you go into 2020, I think Q1 ended up going quite okay. I think counterintuitively, Q1 was a quarter where travel investors ended up putting in, roughly speaking, $2.6 billion across 120 plus deals. And so that number is not bad at all to us. And I think what the audience that are not in the travel industry may be surprised by is the appetite as far as VCs are concerned in terms of investing in startups as well as travel. I think Mitra did a interview with Chris Hamiter yesterday, or maybe the days before, and one of the things that Chris noticed is that overall the investment thesis didn't really change for our industry. What's been changing is the tactics as well as the metrics. I think between Amir and myself, are we becoming a little bit more critical? Absolutely. I think in particular, we care a lot more about the ability for the travel startup, our portfolio company, to survive through the crisis. Because ultimately, we have a long view. We're not expecting any sort of exit within the next 2 to 3 years per se. It's always about 8 to 10 years, that kind of horizon. So we're not really worried about the ultimate end game. What we are concerned is what's going to happen to you as an entrepreneur in the next 6 to 18 months. Do you have the ability to weather the storm in a way that kind of protects the core offering and core tech of your company? If you can do that, then that will give us a lot more confidence in looking further into investing and supporting your company. And as far as existing portfolio is concerned, obviously for those guys, if they have had money from institutional investors versus angel investors, it will give them a lot more confidence. Why do I say that? It's because they can always go back to their institutional investors and look for their guidance and help, even when it comes to financials. So the cap table would matter a lot, which is becoming one of those things that we have to evaluate. If you have a messy cap table with so many individual names listed, we may have to think twice in terms of the sustainability of the business. Once again, not in the long run, but in the short haul. So
that's
just wanted to add a few points here.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective about the cap table. Amir,
Kevin,
if I may, go ahead.
If I can just add something to what Lio said as well. I would say some of the best investments we've made over the years were during the crisis. And I would say some of the best startups that everybody knows today were created either during a crisis or pre-crisis, and they came out of the crisis stronger and better. I remember the .com bust days, and that was when Google was just starting out, and look at where Google is today. Airbnb, they started shortly before the financial crisis.
Yep.
And worth mentioning, we had a chance to invest in Airbnb when there were 3 founders at $2.5 million valuation. And we made the mistake of not investing like 70 other investors in Silicon Valley. So it goes to show that, we make our own share of mistakes. But they went through the financial crisis and look at what they were able to do in the hospitality industry. So crises come and go, be it, COVID-19 is definitely on a different level. We've never seen anything like this. I remember being in Geneva in February in International Air Transport Association's office. We run an accelerator program for them. And the room was filled with about 100 individuals, with airline executives, online travel agencies, system integrators. And I could say with confidence, including myself, nobody in that room in mid-February knew what was coming. Yeah. And these were some experts in the aviation industry. Everybody was thinking this is more of an Asian concern, and it's not really going to affect Europe or North America to the extent that China was affected. And then I got back to Silicon Valley, and a few weeks later, we went into a shelter in place. So I'm not downplaying the impact COVID-19 has had on a global scale in the travel industry, but that is not a reason for us to take pause and not be excited about investment opportunities based on what we've seen come out of other crises. And I do think this crisis is going to last longer. The impact is going to be deeper. There's a lot more question marks on when we're going to come out of this, but we will come out of this. I don't think travel in the long term is going to be not coming back or come back to a lesser degree. I'm fully confident it's going to come back, and things will at some point go back to normal and even surpass the pre-COVID levels.
Now, it's some might say it's quite interesting and maybe even worrying that a bunch of airline execs in the middle of February didn't quite get their head around how large scale this was going to be. But to move on a little bit, the report that you or the series of reports that you referenced, Lio, is the State of Startups report that our sister brand PhocusWright has been doing, as you said, since 2018. And something that they've noted over the last couple of years in their analysis is that the number of early stage investments has actually reduced year over year for not dramatically so, but there is an obvious downturn in the number of early stage investments and more money going in, more investments going into later stage companies. Do you sense, either one of you can answer this really, I mean, do you sense that's a trend that's going to continue? Certainly Pete Como, my boss, and who I was doing a webinar with last week about this very subject, was saying, perhaps it's going to be the safe bets. These are the established brands, so the money will continue going into those that require investment money. And maybe I was just being contrarian and saying maybe this is a chance because things are going to be so different. I agree with you, Amir, that things are going to come back, but the way things come back are going to be so different that actually this is the perfect opportunity for very, very young businesses with a bright idea to come along. That's perhaps different to what's been going on in the last couple of years, but this is a new normal, as we keep on hearing. So perhaps actually there's going to be more bets made on small companies with a great idea rather than the safer bets into bigger later stage companies.
Lio, do you want to take that?
I have a quick thought, and then Amir, feel free to take it over. My quick thought here lies with alternative accommodation. I'm one of those, I guess, bears when it comes to investing in alternative accommodation. I think within the plug and play team, I kept scratching my head throughout 2019 saying, what's going on? Because everybody is putting money into that space. As I think we did a very simple study as far as the breakdown of VC money is concerned. And I think since July of 2019, during the second half essentially of 2019, $3 billion worth of investments were done, out of which a third, meaning like over $1 billion, went to alternative accommodation. And I think some of that money did go to early stage startup in that space as well. And I highly doubt this is going to be the trend into 2020 and 2021. I highly doubt you're going to see a big chunk of travel investments into alternative accommodation. I think the road to IPO demonstrated by Airbnb is going to give a lot of the investors a wake-up call per se.
Yeah.
But as far as your observation, as well as the observation made by the report from PhocusWire is concerned, I can't really comment on travel because I'm a little bit biased. We focus primarily on early stage startups in the travel space as far as investing is concerned. Yeah. Although when it comes to our accelerator program, it is stage agnostic. I think globally, regardless of the industry, the trend is definitely solid, which is bigger rounds, later rounds seems to be like the new normal back in 2019. Less and less people are excited about making earlier and more risky bets. Over to you, Amir.
Amir.
So historically, we've always been early stage investors, seed and Series A. I don't see that changing. I think we are going to place our bets on seed and Series A startups going forward. But again, it has to be an opportunity that has a solution for the immediate needs of the market, as well as something that's going to be relevant post-COVID-19. So I think that investment thesis is not going to change. Something that we've done throughout 2019 and going into 2020 is for each of our respective practices, we're raising a growth fund with the corporate partners that collaborate with us. So we started in brand and retail, and these funds are somewhere, I would say, between $25 to $50 million. And the idea was if we invest in a startup during their seed round or Series A, and we want to exercise our pro rata in their Series B and Series C, our investment thesis with our own capital didn't allow us to do that. So the idea was to raise these growth funds on top of each practice and be able to invest in subsequent rounds of our existing portfolio companies, but at the same time look at Series B and beyond opportunities in startups that are moving in the right direction. Okay. So whereas historically we've been very much focused on seed and Series A, I think you're going to start seeing plug and play write bigger checks into later stage startups with these growth funds that we're targeting. And the first one is brand and retail. We're in final discussions to close one for our supply chain and logistics. And we're having ongoing discussions with a few potential LPs for travel as well.
Okay. Let's move on a little bit then, away from investing. I mean, what do you sense, and you kind of referenced it a little bit there, Amir, you're saying solutions that are relevant now and are going to be relevant or more urgent even in a post-COVID world. I mean, what do you sense some of those travel and hospitality related solutions might be?
So what we're hearing from our corporate partners, and our corporate partners, I would say, is a good mix between hospitality brands, airlines, airports, meta-search like Trivago, and other service providers in the travel industry. And it's so funny how I would say what's relevant for any stakeholder in the travel industry, how all those needs have so much overlap today. So if you're talking to an airline or a hospitality brand like Accor that we work with, touchless solutions have become an absolute must right now. And it's kind of ironic, for hospitality brands being in the hospitality industry, having a high touch solution was always on top of mind. But now during the crisis, anything that could make the traveler feel safer and limit the interaction the traveler has with associates on the ground in a hotel is being looked at. And actually, that's something that we think needs to happen anyway. I don't think high touch will ever go away, especially for luxury brands. But if you can make the travel journey a little bit more seamless by providing touchless checking in solutions, or touchless opening locks, or touchless room service. That is definitely a theme that everybody's looking at, the touchless solutions, which needs to happen anyway, regardless of you being an airline or a hospitality brand. So that's one. And then everybody's talking about sanitization and hygiene. Whether you're talking to an airport, an airline, a hotel, really coming up with new ways of cleaning an environment in a time-efficient, capital-efficient manner, and at the same time, letting passengers or travelers know that that space has been cleaned and they can rest assured they're not being exposed to any viruses that could put them at risk. So everybody's becoming, I would say, obsessed with hygiene and sanitization, which is something I think the travel industry needed anyway, and hopefully it will last beyond COVID-19. So we're looking at that space. And then last but not least, people are looking at health solutions. So we work with Vienna International. They've actually set up a lab at the airport, and they can actually do a test for the COVID-19 virus on site for incoming passengers, so they don't have to go into quarantine when they arrive in Vienna. So the overlap of health and travel is at least in the short term and midterm is becoming more and more apparent. And then something else is happening that I have never seen before that needed to happen regardless of the crisis, where the amount of collaboration we're seeing across different stakeholders in the travel industry is something I've never seen before. So airlines are working closer than ever with airports. Airlines are working closer than ever with hospitality brands. Ground transportation companies are working much more closer with hospitality brands. So as Lio mentioned, in the startup world coming together, what we're seeing is actually the suppliers and service providers in the travel industry are definitely coming together as well, and trying to figure out what the new norm is going to be, at least in the short term, to build traveler trust. And we have an initiative with Airbus. Airbus joined our ecosystem in December of 2019. So they're actually working very closely with their customers, which are the airlines, to reimagine what travel needs to look like and during the crisis and even beyond the crisis, and what visualization initiatives need to take place to make the entire travel journey more seamless and build that confidence up again. So collaboration amongst the different suppliers and stakeholders in the travel industry is something that we're definitely seeing more of as well, thanks to this crisis.
It's interesting and sadly rather ironic almost that it does take a global crisis, a pandemic, to actually bring elements of the industry together who frankly should have been working closer together a long time before now. Some might remark that. So Lio, we're coming towards the end. I mean, it's interesting just taking on from what Amir was saying. It's so many travel startups, especially the B2B ones, have been very much about a technical solution, it's software and things like that. But a lot of the things that Amir was just talking about, these kind of emerging areas that are going to need some focused sanitization, hygiene, health and things like that, those are very practical and almost kind of manual, and they require stuff. They require people, they require cleaning products, all these kind of things, which is not perhaps what the kind of travel startup community has been most well known for in recent years. It's been very much about building a platform and plugging in consumers and plugging in suppliers and crunching data and things like that, and everything works wonderfully. You've got a platform, but these things actually take hardware and kit. I mean, that's quite a substantial shift in what the travel startup world has been about. I mean, what do you kind of make of all that? That it's going to take a different type of travel startup, perhaps, to come forward now.
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Kevin, right there. I do believe in process innovation in addition to product innovation. I think
Yeah.
a lot of the travel startups over the past few years focus very much on process innovation, trying to create a little bit incremental value here and there to make a difference. And aside from that, I think given the pandemic, it takes some product innovation to happen in our space in order to at least solve this short-term need. I feel that every single startup out there needs to have a game plan that covers both the short view and the long view. I think no matter what happens in the next 12 to 18 months, chances are the short-term need in the industry will not be the same as the long-term need. The sanitization need, the safety need, the contactless need. I'm not saying for sure they're not going to stay in the long run, but if you ask me to place my bet, I would argue probably half of those are going to go away eventually. Because ultimately, I always say this, science and kindness, these two things are going to thrive. That's what makes our society better. And when they thrive, chances are some of the concerns, the short-term concerns people have will wear off and slowly but surely go away. And so I guess, you know, my final comment here as far as startups focusing on software and platforms are concerned is that if you haven't pivoted anyhow for the crisis, you should begin looking to that. It's not just about conserving cash. It's not just about changing your organizational structure. It's also about coming back to the basics. As Chip Conley said in our during the keynote of our expo last week, it's no longer about the fancy stuff. You have to think about what travelers needs the most. You have to think about what the OTAs, the TMCs, the airlines, the hotels need the most during the initial phase of the recovery. If it's about customer service, if it's about safety and wellness, and for one reason or another, your company does not offer that yet, or your company is doing something that goes way above that as far as basic needs are concerned, you have to tone down a notch and start focusing on the basic needs, even if that means you need to deviate away from your core competency. I think we cannot be too detached from the world that is going on out there as a travel startup, and so that will be, you know, my thought process as far as, you know, how we can, you know, stay I would say focused in the long run on whatever platform, whatever software you're building, but pivot a little bit to meet with the demand and the need in the short run.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Kevin. I would also add that product and process are not necessarily mutually exclusive of one another. Meaning, for example, we introduced a startup to Accor Hotels that actually is a task management software for the housekeeping teams. And it basically allows the housekeeper to go through a checklist on their phone and sign off on when they clean the cabinets, when they clean the sink, when they clean the toilet, when they clean the bathtub, and all that gets processed in this software. And ultimately, hypothetically, I'm not saying this is what Accor wants to do, that data could be transferred to the guest. So they know exactly who cleaned the room and how long they spent on cleaning the sink, the bathroom, changing the sheets, so on and so forth. So I think process and product can actually go hand in hand in certain instances. Another great example is these automated robots that do surface cleaning across airports. Every airport is looking at them right now. I think psychologically it makes passengers feel better that something is cleaning the floor on an ongoing basis, and less reliance on human capital to have ongoing cleaning done at the airport. So I think there's a middle ground there with process and product.
Okay. Science and kindness. I was really quite taken with how you you put that, Lio. I mean, we could all do with listening to the science and also probably all being a little kinder to one another as well. So that was terrific. You inadvertently answered most of the questions with your lengthy responses of all the things that I pretty much had to say. So we'll put links onto the various things. It's very interesting, the amount of partners that you do work with. Like you said, there's lots of airports, there's lots of hotels, there's airlines thrown in there as well, and intermediaries and stuff like that. So we'll put all that so that readers can get a sense of the partners that you work with and how to get in touch with you to learn more about the program. So I mean, really, it only goes for me to say thank you to Amir. And thank you to Lio for discussing what you think the new reality with is going to be. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.